enjoy Torah responsibly. Torah is amazing, especially when it has practical guidance and insight for us in our lives. So I'm going to share my screen with you. We are not going to even take another moment before jumping in to today's reading. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is reading number 4, and this is our shindig. Reading number 4. Let's go. Come on. Yeah, it's up. Okay, this is Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse number 8. Let's jump in. You shall not, I'm going to read and elaborate. You shall not despise an Edomite, for he is your brother. Now, who are the Edomites? Who are the Edomites? Edomites are folks from the nation of Edom. And the nation of Edom stems from a fellow named Esau, or Esav, who is the twin brother of our patriarch Jacob. So, cousins, right? The Edomite. Torah says, do not despise the Edomite, brother. Family, it's mishpacha. But look at the second half. I tease this. I mentioned this at the end of yesterday's session. This is one of the most remarkable, in my opinion, it's one of the most remarkable verses in the entire Torah. And here, and it's so like in it, it's like the second half of a verse. It's so, innocently jumps in, but it's so powerful. And it says, you shall not despise an Egyptian, for you were a sojourner in his land. Do not despise the Egyptian, because you were a sojourner in his land. You spent time in the land of Egypt. Understand just how incredibly wild this verse is. Essentially, the Torah is telling us to not hold a grudge to the Egyptian. Why not? Notwithstanding the slavery, notwithstanding, and remember, it was brutal. There was a campaign to kill all the Jewish boys. They were thrown into the Nile River. They were killed. They were murdered, and the blood was used for Pharaoh to bathe in. They were used for bricks, extra bricks in the pyramids. Human remains of children. We're talking about horrific actions of hate and persecution and just horrors. And yet the Torah says, do not hate. Do not hate the Egyptian, because they were your hosts. For a little while it was good. Before it got bad, for a little while it was good. As Rashi says, let's talk about Rashi. What is the reason why you don't despise them? Because they hosted you in a time of dire need. Right? Remember when there was a famine in the land of Israel, so you went to Egypt and they hooked you up with food, and for a little while things were good. And then it got bad, but the point is you don't throw out the good with the bad. And this is a really important lesson in life. We live at a time when, and maybe you might be familiar with this concept, maybe you're not. It's called cancel culture. You familiar with that? Raise of hand, cancel culture? Yeah. Cancel culture means that when somebody is caught or somebody does something wrong, so immediately, that's it. Disqualified, discounted, just eliminated from everything and anything, right? Your opinions don't matter and nothing counts anymore. And I'm not going to weigh into the modern examples of that, and each case I'm sure has its own conversation, and it's really not, the details are not important of any specific individual. What I want to mention though is that we tend to basically look at things as black and white, and that means that when we're happy with a person, they're the best. When we're unhappy, it's the worst. So there's no middle ground. It's like either they're the hero or the absolute worst human being ever, God forbid, on the face of the earth. So we're extremists. We love lifting people up and we love tearing them down. Well, the Torah is telling us a little bit of a balanced approach, and that is, look, the Egyptians did very terrible things. At the same time, they also did some good things. So, what's the message? Don't hate. Because hate means you're discounting all the good. Oh, well, all the good they did doesn't matter anymore based on what they did that was not good. I hear that argument. The Torah clearly does not believe that argument. The Torah clearly doesn't subscribe to the argument that just because they did something wrong or something terrible, that therefore we should remember nothing of the good that they did. Clearly the Torah says Do not hate because they did offer you safety and shelter in a time of need. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two about this is, and maybe this is even deeper and more psychological, and that is the Torah is trying to keep us away from enslavement. You see, as long as we're harboring hate for the Egyptian, you know what that means? The Egyptians still have hold over us. As long as we continue to hate the Egyptians, it means that they still have control. They're dictating our mood. Because of the Egyptians, so now we're all bent out of shape. Even today, if we would be bent out of shape because of the Egyptians, it would mean that they still have a hold over us. The Torah is encouraging us to truly be free, and to truly be free means that you let it go. You let go and you don't hold the hate, because holding the hate means that you have abdicated, you have given up your freedom, and once again you are being subjugated by your own hate. The Torah never tells us to hate. The Torah never tells us to hate, not even the Egyptian. If there were ever people that were worthy of hating for the Jew, it would be the Egyptians. I mean, think about other wrongs and horrors that were done. The natural response to other people's, the natural response is hate. Right? I hate you for doing that. And it's natural. And the Torah says it might be natural, but it's not healthy. So act healthy and don't act natural. Right? It's normal to hate. So who says to be normal? Don't be normal. Be Jewish. Being Jewish is not being normal. Sorry for breaking the news. Newsflash. Being Jewish is not normal. It's not always the normative behavior. Normal is to hate the one who hated you. To be Jewish is, they hated you, that's on them, I don't need to hate. As long as I hate, I'm still stuck. You know, even after the Holocaust, there wasn't this movement of hate for the Germans amongst Jews. When I say amongst Jews, you know, individuals, everyone is an individual, so I can't speak to the individual. Everyone's individual experience was different. But collectively, you didn't hear of, destroy Germany, or we hate Germany. You know, you hate what happened, and the horrors are the horrors. But hate just keeps us locked in. Hate just keeps us locked up and subjugated and enslaved. It keeps us in a state of victimhood. To hate is to remain a victim. And Torah encourages us to move past victimhood. Any questions, comments on that? Yeah, Joy?
What about yesterday's talk, the Ammonite and the Moabite?
Well, when it comes to food, that's it. We're done. But by the way, it's still not hating. It's still not hating. We don't admit them. We say, look, you don't have Jewish values, so you're not for the Jewish people. But it doesn't say to hate them, right? In this Torah portion, in this verse, it just says simply, don't despise the Egyptian. Don't harbor hate in your heart for them. And I think it's good advice. It sounds psychological advice. It's advice that Dr. Edith Eger, who we had on last Thursday, would agree with. As long as she spoke about this, forgiveness. How forgiveness is important to let yourself go, to be free for yourself. If they're actually forgiven, that's up to God. But for me to hold hate in my heart towards someone is just for me to remain a victim. And the goal here is to move past victimhood. Now, what about the Ammonite and Moabite? So it doesn't say to hate. It doesn't say to despise them. All it says is, don't admit them. That's it. Because you hate them? No, you don't hate them. They're just not the right fit. Okay, verse number 9. Now we talk about conversion. Children who are born to them, the Edomite or Egyptian, in the third generation may enter the assembly of the Lord. So if they convert, so they can only marry a fellow, let's say an Egyptian converts, they can only marry a fellow Egyptian convert, and then the third generation can marry into the collective. It's a very interesting kind of holding space for a few generations, and then you full admittance into the community. But that's what the Torah says. Again, I just want to be very clear. Don't think that you're modern Egyptians, that this rule applies to modern Egyptians. This is referring to the ancient nation of Egypt, which by today is already mixed up. We don't have the original Egyptians around. Maybe it's still called Egypt, but it's not the same folks. All of the nations were moved around many times, many years ago. Next. Verse 10, when a camp goes out against your enemies, you shall beware of everything evil. Let's see what Rashi says. Yeah. Take a look at what Rashi says. For Satan, which is the evil force that God hires to provide challenge and prosecution for negativity, for Satan accuses in times of danger. Thus, extra care must be taken in time of war when danger prevails. So, at a time of risk, at a time when life is on the line, it's important to beware to not do anything that is considered to be evil. No messing around, no fooling around, no impropriety, right? Even in times of war, I mentioned this last week when we spoke about the tree, not cutting down the fruit tree. Even in a time of war, we have to be very careful to maintain our morality. And here the Torah says, not only even in times of war, especially in times of war, as Rashi said, when Satan is when it's dangerous, and therefore there's more of a risk. For sure, you have to make sure to be completely above board and totally, as they say in New York, kosher. All right, verse. What does privy mean? No, not privilege here. Privy.
To have information about something that other people
Yeah, no, but it
don't
means something.
have?
Yeah, it means something else over here. Privy.
Yeah, that's a concept to normally know that you're not privy to this information. Yeah.
Privy toilet. I believe it's a bathroom. Yeah, privy is an old-fashioned term for an outdoor toilet. Torah tells us something interesting regarding sanitation. It's a very interesting. I mean, again, there are lots of laws, and they're kind of all one after the other. You shall have a designated place outside the camp that you can go out there to use as a privy. In other words, this is before indoor plumbing. So the Torah is telling us that if you have to use the bathroom, go outside the camp. You know what that does for the camp? Number one, it maintains hygiene, good hygiene. Number two, it maintains the sanctity of the camp, the spiritual sanctity. As we know in Jewish law, you cannot pray, you cannot daven, or do any holy matters like a mitzvah in a place like a bathroom. So, for example, in a person's home, we try to put a mezuzah on every single door of the home except for the bathroom, because the bathroom is not a room that needs a mezuzah, because it's not a place where you do a mitzvah. You don't do a mitzvah, you don't pray, you don't say God's name, you don't study Torah, you don't do any of that in a bathroom where waste is this human waste is discarded. And that's in a case of plumbing where it moves on. Let alone a designated place where it remains. Therefore, the Torah says, do not create toilets, essentially, outdoor toilets, amongst the camp. Rather, make it outside the camp. This also had the physical benefit of maintaining physical health and hygiene inside the Jewish camp. At a time when hygiene was not understood, at a time when people, they mixed human waste with drinking water, and they didn't know any different. Right? The rivers were used for both. Judaism and Jewish life always taught, the Torah 3,300 years ago taught, bathrooms need to be outside. So here we see how the spiritual affects the physical. The spiritual rule of maintaining the spiritual sanctity of the camp and not having bathrooms inside where you're going to be doing Torah and mitzvot, that spiritual rule also benefits us on a physical level as well. Look at verse 14. I don't want to get too graphic here, but it's in the Torah. And you shall keep a stake in addition to your weapons. And it shall be when you sit down outside to relieve yourself, you shall dig with it, and you shall return and cover your waste. So again, What's clear here is that the Torah is concerned about hygiene. It's incredible. The Torah is not only a spiritual code, it's also a very practical code as well. And why all of this? Verse 15, for the Lord your God goes along in the midst of your camp to rescue you and to deliver your enemies before you. Therefore your camp shall be holy. So they should not see anything unseemly among you and would turn away from you. So basically, your camp should be a camp where you live and not a bathroom. So have your bathrooms outside the camp. Make sure to cover everything, and that's it. Okay. Take a look at verse 16. This actually dovetails for those of you that were on our class last night, the Jewish course of why we spoke about slavery and Torah. Here's a very important verse on this topic. Verse 16. You shall not, listen to this, you shall not deliver a slave to his master if he seeks refuge with you from his master. If a slave runs away from another nation, and other nations we know historically treated slaves horrifically, just abuse and murder and everything. If a slave runs away and seeks refuge by a Jew, the Jew is not permitted to return the slave back to the master. Rather, he shall be allowed to reside among you wherever he chooses within any of your cities, where it is good for him. You shall not oppress him. Unbelievable. At a time when slavery was the norm, at a time when human oppression, human rights wasn't a thing, human oppression, again, also was the norm. When slaves were abused by their masters, the Torah says, we have a different set of rules. 3,300 years ago, our Torah says, that when a slave runs away, you have to welcome them in, not oppress them, and let them live wherever they want. That's remarkable. Verse 18, there shall not be a prostitute of the daughters of Israel, and there shall not be a male prostitute among the sons of Israel. Okay. I'm skipping verse 19. Verse 20, you shall not give interest to your brother. Look at that. The Torah is against lending with interest. And I know what you're thinking. Banks, credit cards, mortgages. I know what goes on. The Torah is against it. The Torah says you shall not give interest to your brother, whether it be interest on money, interest on food. I'll give you a sandwich, but you have to pay me back two sandwiches later, or interest on any other item for which interest is normally taken. Look at verse 21. And by the way, this has been the source of anti-Semitism. You may, however, give interest to a Gentile, but to your brother you shall not give interest. Understand this. Giving interest, lending on interest is normal. The Torah says, but don't do it to your family. But what about, again, we're all family, but there's immediate family and extended family. So you're allowed to charge interest to someone who's not Jewish. But to a Jew cannot charge interest. But to your brother you shall not give interest. Sorry, this is giving interest, not even charging interest. This is from the perspective, well, I'm not sure what give means. Whatever. In any case, an interest loan should not be drawn up when it comes to mishpacha, when it comes to the Jewish family. Why not? In order that the Lord your God shall bless you in every one of your endeavors on the land to which you are coming to possess. Basically, if you make sure not to lend with interest, then God will protect you, God will bless you, and the land of Israel will be good to you. Good. Next, verse 22. Oh, by the way, I want to point out the Hebrew. Okay, look at verse 20. Chaf is 20. The Hebrew word for interest is neshech. Nun shin chaf, neshech. Neshech means interest, but it's also related to the Hebrew word neshicha, which means a bite, usually in conjunction with a snake bite. Our sages tell us why is interest called neshech, which could also mean a bite or a snake bite, because charging interest is like a snake bite. What happens with a snake bite? So the snake bites a person, God forbid, and releases the venom. The person does not die immediately. The venom slowly goes and travels into the bloodstream and then travels through the body and ultimately paralyzes and kills the person because of the poison that has been injected in the person through the bite. And that's what, in other words, it's a slow process, but eventually it's devastating. The Torah is also hinting to us that interest follows the same path. You don't feel it right away. It's 5%, 10%, 20%. Who feels it? You don't feel it right away. But it's like a hole that keeps on draining a person's finances, draining a person's money, and it can ultimately be devastating and deadly, financially devastating for the person, God forbid. Like a little snake bite. It's a little puncture wound, but it goes into the bloodstream and it can be devastating. Interest is the same way. So that's a deeper insight into the Hebrew word neshech, interest, or neshicha, biting, snake bite. Verse 22, when you make a vow to the Lord, your God, you shall not delay in paying it. Make good on your vows to God, for the Lord your God will demand it of you, and it will be counted as a sin for you. I'm sure synagogues would love to use this to collect on campaigns, to collect on pledges, right? You vow to the Lord, to a house for God, you got to pay up. But anyway, the Torah says basically if you make a pledge to the Holy Temple, then don't delay in paying it up. But if you shall refrain from making vows, you will have no sin. So maybe don't make vows, right? If you make a pledge, you got to keep it. If you don't make a pledge, then there's no risk. And finally, the Torah says something beautiful: observe and do what is emitted from your lips, just as you have pledged to the Lord your God as a donation, which you have spoken from your mouth. And that means that just like when you pledge to God, you should keep it, so too everything that we say, every commitment that our mouths utter, should be followed through. It's really important to keep to our commitments. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says this adds a positive commandment to pay one's vows in time to the aforementioned negative commandment, which was, namely, you shall not delay in paying it. So we have both a negative and a positive commandment. You have this, throughout Torah, where you have the same rule that has both a negative and a positive. The negative being don't do that, and the positive being rather do that. So in this case, it's don't delay. That's the negative. Rather, pay up right away. So you have two mitzvot, 2 of the 613 are this referred to keeping our pledges and fulfilling them in a timely manner and not delaying. All right, so that's it for today. And of course, I think, well, hold on, before we close it out formally, I will mention that I think there's a beautiful message here for all of us, and that is that our commitment, our word should be our honor, or whatever the phrase is. We should stick to our word. We should mean what we say, and we should say what we mean. And if we pledge something, if we commit to something, whether it's a contribution, whether it's, helping someone else out, we should be very hesitant to back out on our commitments. So we should be mindful and careful to only take the commitments that we intend on keeping. Don't just say, yeah, for sure, and then not plan on seeing it through. That's not the Torah way. And the Torah way is all about the Torah way: truth, justice, and the Torah way. All right, so today, what do we explore? We talked about, let me grab my chumash here. We talked about we talked about not hating the Egyptian. Number one, don't forget the good that was done. You can't just discard that. Good was done. You have to be thankful for that. And number two, harboring hate means that you're remaining a prisoner. So we spoke about the Egyptian and no hate. We spoke about the sanctity in the camp, a spiritual sanctity that also has physical benefits. And the reality is that that's true with all mitzvot. Even if it seems sometimes that, wow, it's such a spiritual thing, we're doing it just for God. The reality is that whether we're aware of it or not, there is a practical physical benefit for us in our lives as well. We spoke about a refuge for fleeing slaves. The Torah says when a slave runs away, you have to protect them and you have to provide them a safe haven and not send them back and not harm them. So here we have the Torah's humanitarian side. We have the idea of modesty, about promiscuity and staying away from promiscuity. We talked about the mitzvah or the prohibition against taking interest, charging interest to a fellow Jew. The idea is that, yes, interest is normal. A person could say, look, I'm giving you money and I'm out that money, so the least you can do is return it with a little extra, because I could have done such and such with it, although it makes sense logically, but don't do it to your brother or sister. It could be devastating, like a snake bite, and it could ruin a person, God forbid, or sink them. The interest can accrue. And look, I don't have to tell you, we know what happens with interest and with loans. It doesn't always end well. So the Torah tries to minimize that, at least for family. Right? You don't have to charge interest to someone else, but at least for family, you're not allowed to. And then we talked about the idea of fulfilling pledges. If we say something, we should mean it, and we should keep it, and we should do it in a timely fashion. All right, that's it for today for Daily Power Parsha. Hope you enjoyed, and hope it's uplifted your day in some way. And if you liked it, pay it forward. Just don't charge interest. Anyway, I hope you found it interesting and meaningful. Any questions?
Is it a thing nowadays not to charge interest
Yes.
to a fellow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's against Torah law to charge interest. It must be done. Look at this. Just Jew at Nike. The swoosh. The swoosh is here. No, we don't charge interest. We don't do it. Jewish loans. How do Israeli banks get around it? There's a way to not, if instead of a loan, if the arrangement is an investment, then you can recoup profit on the investment. Does that make sense? Like if I'm investing in a company, the arrangement could be I'm going to give $1,000 to the company with the expectation that I'm going to get out $1,200. That's not interest. That's an investment. So I don't invest $1,000 to get back $1,000. That's a waste of time. I invest $1,000 to get back 20%, let's say $1,200. So that's legal. You can invest. You're allowed to invest in a business, but not through a loan. So if it's set up as an investment, that's one thing. So I believe Israeli banks, the ones that at least are interested in following Jewish law, set things up like an investment instead of a loan. It may sound like a trick, but there is a difference. The Rebbe once spoke about this. He said, when you're invested, you're an active partner. When you lend, you're not actively doing anything. So why should your money make money? God wants us to be active. So if you're investing in something, so then enjoy the profits. But just because you gave someone money, it's not a lot of effort. You're taking it. Anyway, there's different ways to look at it, and certainly you can, there's a lot of discussion on that last point that I've just mentioned, but that's just one insight, one way of looking at it. Mark, what do you have?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
That with all the Jews who've been persecuted and murdered over the centuries because of interest.
Right.
And because interest is from the same root word as snakebite.
Right.
Maybe the message was there that Jew or non-Jew don't charge interest.
Yeah. It would be nice, right, to live in a world where people helped each other out and just looked to get what they gave and not looked at it as as a profiteering business. It would be nice. That's the Torah's vision, at least within our own ranks. And look, if you believe that Torah is meant to inspire the world, that we're meant to be led into the nations, then that should go on. By the way, we know that historically, Jews were locked out in certain countries of any sort of other commerce, and the only thing they could do is be a money lender, and that was their only parnasa, and the only way for them to make money was to charge interest. And then the non-Jews used it against the Jews as another angle for persecution. So it's for much of our history, we were in a no-win situation, and that's it is what it is, and no hate, just the reality. But we're staying positive per the opening conversation. All right, let's do some shofar. Sounds good? Well, you'll tell me. I actually would rather stand up while doing it because I think it's holy enough that it should be done while standing. I wish I had an automatic lift on my table, but I don't. Spoiler alert.
Should we stand?
You could stand. Nasser, are you offering to hold the computer? Why not? Hold the laptop. Oh wow, look at this. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Can you hold this also? Impossible, right? I'm going to hold this. That's very close to my face because we're broadcasting live also on YouTube, or as we might call it, JewTube. All right, no. Rather hold my computer with two hands. I got this. I'll do the shofar with one hand. I can do the shofar with one hand behind my back. No. All right, y'all ready? Try to get a better sound. All right. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope, once again, that the shofar inspires all of us to continue to be introspective and prepare for the new year in the proper way. All right, see you all tonight, Torah Study 7:30. We'll talk about honest weights and measures and a personal message from that. And otherwise, things are rolling on. Don't forget to sign up for the dinner. If you haven't yet signed up for the dinner, it's going to be off the hook. In other words, it's going to be incredible. A catered meal delivered to your home with an all-star program set up from international stars. So, join me September 10th, Thursday, for the dinner. All right, have a wonderful day. We'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Pleasure.